The emergency klaxons screamed through the cramped cockpit of the Wanderer's Dream as Marcus Webb fought desperately with the controls. Sparks cascaded from the navigation console while the ship bucked and rolled through the upper atmosphere of an uncharted moon. His cargo of rare earth minerals shifted ominously in the hold, throwing off his center of gravity with each violent lurch. "Come on, you piece of junk," Marcus muttered through gritted teeth, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering yoke. The atmospheric entry had been rough, but manageable, until the cascade failure in the stabilization system. Now he was riding a 20-ton missile toward the surface of a world that didn't even appear on most star charts. The landscape rushing up to meet him was breathtaking despite his dire circumstances. Rolling hills covered in what looked like crystalline formation stretched to the horizon, glittering like scattered diamonds under the light of a pale orange sun. 3 moons hung in the lavender sky, their gravitational pull playing havoc with his already failing systems. Impact came with a thunderous crash that threw Marcus against his restraints hard enough to see stars. The ship plowed through a field of crystal formations, sending rainbow fragments flying in all directions before finally grinding to a halt against a small hill. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines as silence fell over the wreckage. Marcus groaned, tasting blood as he slowly unbuckled himself from the pilot's seat. His left shoulder throbbed, and his uniform jacket was torn across the chest, but he seemed to be in one piece. The same couldn't be said for his ship. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the twisted remains of his starboard engine assembly scattered across 100 meters of alien terrain. "Emergency beacon," he muttered, fumbling for the distress transmitter. His heart sank as he pulled out the mangled device. The crash had crushed it beyond repair. Perfect. Just perfect. He managed to pry open the emergency hatch and stumbled out into the strange atmosphere. The air was thin but breathable, carrying a faint metallic tang that made his teeth ache. The gravity was lighter than Earth standard, making each step feel slightly bouncy. All around him, crystal formations jutted from the ground like alien trees, their faceted surfaces catching and refracting the sunlight into spectacular displays of color. The sound of approaching footsteps on crystal gravel made him turn. A figure was walking toward him across the field, humanoid but clearly alien. As the stranger drew closer, Marcus felt his breath catch. She was tall and graceful, with pale violet skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Her hair was a cascade of silver white that moved like liquid mercury, and her eyes were large and luminous, shifting between shades of deep purple and electric blue. She wore practical clothing, a fitted jumpsuit in muted earth tones with a utility belt around her narrow waist. But what truly caught his attention were the delicate patterns of bioluminescence that traced along her exposed skin like living tattoos, pulsing gently with her heartbeat. "You're trespassing on private property," she said, her voice melodious but wary. She spoke in accented but clear standard galactic, though her pronunciation carried musical qualities that made even simple words sound like poetry. Marcus raised his hands peacefully. "I'm sorry. My ship malfunctioned, I had no choice in where I landed. I'm Marcus Webb, independent cargo pilot." He gestured toward the smoking wreckage. "As you can see, I'm not exactly in a position to leave." The alien woman studied him with those shifting eyes, taking in his torn uniform in obvious distress. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin flickered more rapidly, which Marcus guessed might indicate emotional agitation. "I'm Zephyra Thorn," she said finally. "This is my crystal farm. And you've just destroyed about 3 months' worth of growth." She gestured toward the scattered fragments that had once been towering crystal formations. Marcus's heart sank. "I'm sorry. Truly. I had no control over the landing. But I can work, I can help you replant or rebuild whatever I damaged. I just need to find a way to contact the shipping lanes for rescue." Zephyra's laugh was bitter. "The nearest communication relay is 2 weeks' journey by foot. And it only activates during the convergence of the 3 moons, which won't happen for another 40 days. She studied his face as the implications sank in. "You're stranded here, human." 40 days, Marcus repeated, running a hand through his dark hair. Well, I meant what I said about working. I grew up on my family's hydroponic farm before I took to the stars. I know agriculture. This isn't agriculture, Zephyra said sharply. These are living crystals, grown through symbiosis with Valdorian soil and tended through psychic resonance. Your people couldn't possibly understand. Try me, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm stuck here anyway. Might as well make myself useful while I wait for rescue. Unless you prefer I just sit by my wreckage for the next 6 weeks. Zephyra was quiet for a long moment, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in what seemed like deep thought. You'd work for food and shelter. Nothing more. I'd work to make up for the damage I caused, Marcus said. And because it's the right thing to do. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because the suspicious edge left her voice. Very well. But you follow my rules, and you don't touch anything without my permission. These crystals are my livelihood, they're all I have left. There was pain in those last words, a deep sadness that made Marcus want to ask questions he knew weren't his business. Instead, he simply nodded. Understood. Zephyra's dwelling was a marvel of alien architecture, a series of connected domes that seemed to grow from the crystal formations themselves. The walls were translucent, casting rainbow patterns throughout the interior as sunlight filtered through them. The furniture was clearly grown rather than built, shaped from what looked like living crystal that had been coaxed into functional forms. You can sleep in the guest alcove, Zephyra said, leading him through rooms that hummed with subtle energy. Meals are at dawn and dusk. The rest of the time, we work. What exactly are we growing? Marcus asked, accepting a cup of something warm and faintly luminescent that she offered him. Resonance crystals, Zephyra explained, settling into a chair that molded itself to her form. They're used in deep space communication arrays, medical equipment, and navigation systems. Each one takes months to grow and must be attuned to specific frequencies. She gestured toward the windows, where the crystal field stretched into the distance. My family has been tending this farm for 12 generations. Your family? Marcus asked carefully. Zephyra's patterns dimmed. I'm the last. The others died in the plague that swept through this sector 3 years ago. I've been maintaining the farm alone since then. She looked at him with those shifting eyes. It's been difficult. The loneliness in her voice was palpable, and Marcus felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. He'd been alone for most of his adult life, drifting between star systems with no permanent attachments, but this was different. This was someone who'd lost everything and was still fighting to preserve what remained of her heritage. Tell me about the crystals, he said. How do they grow? For the first time, Zephyra's expression brightened. She spent the next hour explaining the intricate process of crystal cultivation, how the seeds were planted in perfect geometric patterns, how they drew energy from the 3 moons' gravitational fields, how each variety required different soil conditions and harmonic frequencies to thrive. Marcus found himself genuinely fascinated. The science was unlike anything he'd encountered in human space, but the fundamental principles of nurturing living things were universal. When Zephyra demonstrated how she could make the crystals resonate by humming specific tones, her whole face lit up with joy, and her bioluminescent patterns danced with vibrant colors. Your skin, Marcus said suddenly. The patterns, they respond to your emotions? Zephyra nodded, a faint blush darkening her violet cheeks. It's a Valdorian trait. We evolved alongside the crystals, and our emotional states affect their growth. Happy thoughts make better crystals. Her patterns flickered uncertainly. It's been challenging to maintain the proper emotional resonance while working alone. Marcus set down his cup and leaned forward. Well, you're not alone anymore. At least for the next 40 days. The look Zephyra gave him was complex, gratitude mixed with wariness, hope tempered by fear of disappointment. Her patterns shifted to a soft golden glow that seemed to warm the entire room. We start work at dawn, she said quietly. The morning resonance is strongest then. That night, lying in the guest alcove on a bed that had literally grown from the floor to accommodate his human physiology, Marcus stared up at the 3 moons through the crystal ceiling. He'd been traveling the galaxy for 8 years, and in all that time, he'd never found anywhere that felt like home. But there was something about this place, about the quiet dignity of the woman who tended it, that made him think he might finally understand what he'd been searching for among the stars. In the main dome, Zephyra stood at her window, watching the moonlight play across her ruined crystal fields. For 3 years, she'd maintained the farm through sheer determination, but the loneliness had been eating away at her like acid. Now, unexpectedly, she had company. Human company. She'd heard stories about humans, their stubbornness, their curiosity, their strange ability to adapt to anything. But she'd never met one before. Marcus seemed genuine in his offer to help, but could she trust him? Could she risk letting someone into her carefully guarded world? Her patterns pulsed with uncertain light as she considered the question. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow, she would discover whether humans were as adaptable as the stories claimed. Outside, the crystal fields hummed with subtle harmonies, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't seem quite so lonely. Dawn on Valdo's Prime painted the crystal fields in shades of rose and gold as Marcus followed Zephyra through the maze of towering formations. The morning air hummed with an almost musical quality, and he could feel a subtle vibration through the soles of his boots, the crystals responding to the rising sun. The key is patience, Zephyra explained, kneeling beside a cluster of sapphire blue crystals that reached barely to her waist. Her bioluminescent patterns glowed a soft amber in the morning light. Each formation has its own rhythm, its own song. You must learn to listen. Marcus crouched beside her, studying the geometric perfection of the crystal structure. What am I listening for? This, she said, placing her palm against the largest crystal. Immediately, a low harmonic tone filled the air, growing stronger as the other crystals in the cluster joined the resonance. The sound was beautiful, like wind chimes made of starlight. How do you know what frequency they need? Marcus asked, genuinely fascinated. Zephyra's eyes shifted from purple to blue as she smiled. Feel here, she said, guiding his hand to rest beside hers on the crystal surface. The moment his skin made contact, Marcus gasped. Energy flowed through the crystal like a living pulse, and he could sense the formation's needs as clearly as if it were speaking to him. The cluster was healthy but yearning for a specific harmonic that would encourage new growth. Remarkable, he breathed. I can actually feel what it wants. Zephyra stared at him in amazement, her patterns flaring bright gold. That's impossible. Humans don't have crystal resonance abilities. It takes years of training even for Valdorians to. She broke off as Marcus began to hum, unconsciously matching the frequency he felt flowing through the crystal. The entire cluster responded instantly, its blue light intensifying as new facets began to form along the edges of each spire. How are you doing that? Zephyra whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Marcus shrugged, still maintaining the harmonic tone. I don't know. It just feels right. Like the crystal is telling me what it needs. For the next 3 hours, they worked together through the morning fields. To Zephyra's astonishment, Marcus showed an intuitive understanding of crystal cultivation that surpassed her expectations. He could sense which formations needed attention, could adjust his harmonic resonance to encourage different types of growth, and seemed to know instinctively how to handle the delicate crystal seedlings without damaging them. This is unprecedented, Zephyra said as they paused for a midday meal in the shade of a towering amethyst formation. In 12 generations, my family never recorded a non-Valdorian showing such natural ability. Marcus bit into one of the sweet, crystalline fruits she'd packed for lunch. Maybe it's because I'm not trying to force it. On my family's farm, we always said the plants would tell you what they needed if you listened carefully enough. But these aren't plants, Zephyra protested. They're living mineral structures, grown through psychic resonance and they're alive, Marcus interrupted gently. That's all that matters. Life wants to grow, wants to thrive. The specific mechanics are just details. Zephyra studied his face, noting the genuine care in his expression as he looked out over her crystal fields. Her patterns pulsed with a warm golden light that she tried to suppress but couldn't quite control. You really mean that, don't you? You actually care about them. I care about what's important to you, Marcus said quietly, meeting her shifting gaze. This place, these crystals, they're your heritage, your family's legacy. Of course I care. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Zephyra felt her patterns brightening involuntarily and quickly looked away, focusing on her meal to hide her emotional response. Their afternoon work took them deeper into the crystal caves that honeycombed the hills behind Zephyra's dwelling. Here, the most valuable crystals grew in complete darkness, fed by underground mineral springs and the harmonic resonance of the moon tides. These are communication crystals, Zephyra explained as they descended into a vast cavern lit only by the soft bioluminescence of her skin and the natural glow of the crystal formations. Each one is attuned to specific stellar coordinates, allowing instantaneous communication across interstellar distances. The cavern was breathtaking. Crystals of every color imaginable stretched from floor to ceiling, creating natural archways and chambers that sparkled like captured starlight. The air thrummed with barely audible harmonics as hundreds of formations sang to each other in perfect synchronization. It's beautiful, Marcus breathed, his voice hushed with reverence. And valuable, Zephyra added. A single communication crystal can trade for enough supplies to run the farm for a full season. But they take nearly a year to reach maturity, and they're incredibly delicate during the growth phase. They worked in companionable silence for several hours, Marcus learning to tend the more sensitive formations while Zephyra harvested mature crystals for shipment. The close quarters of the cave meant they often had to work side by side, their bodies brushing as they moved between the narrow passages. Each casual contact sent little sparks of awareness through Marcus, and he noticed that Zephyra's bioluminescent patterns grew brighter whenever they touched. The cave's natural acoustics amplified every sound, their breathing, the soft rustle of clothing, the subtle harmonics of the crystals responding to their emotional states. Marcus, Zephyra said suddenly, her voice uncertain. The crystals are reacting to something. Their harmony is different. He paused in his work, listening carefully to the cave's song. She was right, the perfect synchronization was shifting, becoming more complex, more layered. What does that mean? I'm not sure, she admitted. I've never heard anything quite like it. It's as if they're responding to. A new voice interrupted from the cave entrance. Well. What have we here? Both Marcus and Zephyra spun toward the sound. A tall, imposing figure stood silhouetted against the daylight, his presence somehow making the cave feel smaller and more confined. As he stepped into the crystal-lit interior, Marcus could see he was Valdorian, but unlike Zephyra's graceful elegance, this man radiated predatory confidence. His skin was deeper violet than Zephyra's, and his bioluminescent patterns were stark silver lines that seemed to pulse with controlled energy. He wore expensive clothing that managed to look both practical and luxurious, and his smile revealed teeth that were just slightly too sharp. Hello, Zephyra, the newcomer said, his voice smooth as expensive liquor. I heard rumors of increased productivity from your little farm. Imagine my surprise to discover the reason. Dante, Zephyra replied, her patterns dimming to barely visible flickers. What are you doing here? Why, being neighborly, of course. Dante Voss stepped closer, his intense gaze fixed on Marcus. And you must be the human I've been hearing about. Dante Voss, owner of Voss Crystal Enterprises. The largest crystal operation in this sector. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Dante and Zephyra. Marcus Webb. And I'm just helping out until I can arrange transport off-world. How charitable of you. Dante's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tell me, Marcus, what is dear Zephyra paying you for your obviously considerable talents? That's between us, Marcus replied evenly. Of course. But I wonder if you truly understand the value of what you're accomplishing here. Dante gestured toward the glowing crystal formations. A human with natural crystal resonance abilities? That's unprecedented. Revolutionary, even. Zephyra moved to Marcus's side, her patterns flaring with agitation. Whatever you're thinking, Dante, forget it. Marcus isn't interested in your schemes. My dear Zephyra, always so quick to assume the worst. Dante's tone remained pleasant, but Marcus caught the underlying steel. I'm simply making a business proposition. Marcus, I'm prepared to offer you a position with my company. Full benefits, luxury accommodations, and a salary that would make most ship captains weep with envy. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said carefully, but I've already committed to helping here. Admirable loyalty, Dante said, though his expression suggested he found it more foolish than admirable. But perhaps you should consider your options more carefully. Zephyra's operation is quaint. But I could offer you opportunities to work with crystal formations she couldn't dream of. Rare varieties, experimental applications, cutting-edge techniques. He produced an elegant communication device from his jacket. My contact information. Think about it, Marcus. When you're ready to move beyond this pastoral existence, I can offer you a real future. After Dante departed, the cave felt somehow polluted by his presence. The crystal harmonics had shifted to a discordant minor key that made both Marcus and Zephyra uncomfortable. You shouldn't have refused him so quickly, Zephyra said quietly as they gathered their tools. Dante doesn't like being told no. And he has resources I could never match. Marcus touched her arm gently, noting how her patterns brightened at the contact. I told you, I'm not interested in his money. Then what are you interested in? She asked, echoing the question from their first day. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of starlight in her shifting eyes. I'm interested in this, he said softly, his hand coming up to trace one of the luminescent patterns on her cheek. The crystals around them began to sing, a harmony more beautiful and complex than anything Zephyra had ever heard. It was as if the formations were responding to the emotional resonance between them, amplifying and reflecting their growing connection. The crystals, Zephyra whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. They're singing because of us. Because of what we're feeling. What are we feeling? Marcus asked, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Instead of answering with words, Zephyra rose on her toes and kissed him. Her lips were cool and soft, and the moment they touched, every crystal in the cave burst into brilliant light. The harmonics swelled to a crescendo that seemed to resonate through their very bones, a song of connection and possibility that neither had ever imagined. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the cave continued to glow with gentle radiance. Zephyra's entire body shimmered with patterns of gold and silver, more beautiful than any constellation. I've never seen the crystals respond like that, she said, her voice filled with awe. Neither have I, Marcus replied, pulling her closer. But I'd like to see what else they can do. As they kissed again, surrounded by singing crystals and bathed in alien starlight, neither noticed the small surveillance device that Dante had left behind, or the way its red recording light pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. Some discoveries, they would learn, came with a price, and Dante Vos was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. But for now, in the crystal song cathedral they had created together, there was only the two of them and the beginning of something that would change both their worlds forever. 2 weeks had passed since Dante's visit, and Marcus had never been happier. Each morning brought new discoveries, both about crystal cultivation and about the remarkable woman who had become the center of his universe. Zephyra's initial wariness had melted away, replaced by a warmth that made her bioluminescent patterns dance like aurora across her skin whenever he was near. They had established a routine that felt as natural as breathing. Dawn would find them working side by side in the crystal fields, their hands often brushing as they tended the growing formations. Midday brought shared meals in the shade of towering crystals, where conversation flowed as easily as laughter. Evenings were spent in the caves, harvesting mature crystals while the harmonics sang around them like a celestial choir. But it was the quiet moments that Marcus treasured most, the times when Zephyr would catch him watching her work and reward him with a smile that made the crystals around them glow brighter, or when she would fall asleep against his shoulder as they sat watching the 3 moons rise over the fields. "You're thinking too loudly," Zephyr murmured against his chest as they lay together in her dwelling, the crystal walls casting rainbow patterns across their intertwined forms. Marcus chuckled, his fingers tracing the constellation of luminescent patterns along her arm. "Sorry. Just happy, I guess. Is that strange?" "Completely strange," she agreed, lifting her head to look at him with those shifting eyes. "I haven't been truly happy in 3 years. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. And now?" Her patterns flared bright gold. "Now I remember why the crystals sing." They were interrupted by an urgent chiming from Zephyr's communication array. She reluctantly pulled away from Marcus's embrace to answer the call, her expression growing increasingly concerned as she listened. "What is it?" Marcus asked, sitting up as she ended the transmission. "That was Petra Blackwood, my supplier contact on the trade station," Zephyr said, her patterns dimming with worry. "She says there are rumors circulating about contaminated crystals from my farm. 3 buyers have cancelled their orders." Marcus frowned. "Contaminated how?" "We've been checking the formations daily, everything's been healthy." "I know, but," Zephyr's words were cut off by another chime, this one from the farm's monitoring system. The automated sensors were detecting anomalies in the eastern crystal fields. They dressed quickly and rushed outside, arriving at the affected area just as the first rays of dawn illuminated a scene that made Zephyr cry out in anguish. 6 of her finest communication crystals, formations that had been thriving just the day before, were now dulled and lifeless, their natural song replaced by an ominous silence. "No," Zephyr whispered, falling to her knees beside the nearest cluster. "These were nearly mature. Another month and they would have been ready for harvest." Marcus knelt beside her, carefully examining the affected crystals. What he found made his blood run cold. "Zephyr, look at this." At the base of each damaged formation, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, were tiny injection sites, microscopic holes that had been drilled into the crystal matrix and then sealed. "Someone did this deliberately," Marcus said grimly. "This isn't disease or contamination, it's sabotage." Zephyr's patterns flickered between fear and rage. "But who would?" She stopped, her eyes widening with realization. "Dante. Can you prove it?" "The crystals are dying from the inside out," she said, her voice hollow with despair. "Whatever was injected into them is disrupting their harmonic matrix, causing them to lose resonance. It's brilliant, actually. Evil, but brilliant." Marcus stood, his jaw tight with anger. "How long before the contamination spreads?" "If it follows the harmonic lines through the field." Zephyr calculated quickly, her patterns pulsing with distress. 2 weeks, maybe 3. By then, half my crop will be worthless." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of an approaching hover vehicle broke the morning silence. Marcus wasn't surprised to see Dante's expensive transport settling onto the crystal-strewn landing area near Zephyr's dwelling. Dante emerged accompanied by a striking human woman with short auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. She wore the practical clothing of a trade negotiator, but Marcus noticed the way she carried herself, alert, observant, potentially dangerous. "Zephyr, my dear," Dante called as he approached, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "I heard about your recent difficulties. Such a tragedy when crystal farms suffer contamination events." "Cut the act, Dante," Zephyr snapped, her patterns flaring angry red. "We know you did this." Dante's expression shifted to wounded innocence. "My dear woman, such accusations. I came here to offer assistance in your time of need." He gestured to his companion. "Allow me to introduce Petra Blackwood, my new business associate. I believe you've spoken." The human woman stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Thorne, I'm sorry about the cancelled orders. Unfortunately, when rumors of contamination begin circulating, buyers become extremely cautious." "Rumors you helped spread," Marcus said flatly. Petra's green eyes flicked to him with interest. "I merely reported what I was told by reliable sources. In the crystal trade, reputation is everything." "Indeed," Dante agreed smoothly. "Which is why I'm prepared to make you both a generous offer. Marcus, my previous proposal stands: triple salary, luxury accommodations, unlimited research opportunities. And Zephyra." He smiled that predatory smile. "I'm willing to purchase your entire farm. Fair market value, of course, adjusted for the current difficulties." "You mean the difficulties you created," Zephyra shot back. "Prove it," Dante said simply. "Until then, you have two choices: accept my offer, or watch your family's legacy die one crystal at a time." After Dante and Petra departed, Zephyra slumped against Marcus in defeat. "He's won," she whispered. "Even if we could prove he's behind the sabotage, the contamination has already started. By the time we could take legal action, there won't be a farm left to save." Marcus held her close, feeling her bioluminescent patterns dim to barely visible flickers. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to stop the contamination. The only cure would be to remove every affected crystal and destroy it before the contamination spreads," Zephyra said. "But that would mean destroying months of work, and I'd still need to replant from scratch. I don't have the resources for that kind of setback." "What if you did have the resources?" Zephyra looked up at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the crystal fields that had become more precious to him than any treasure. "I have a cargo hold full of rare earth minerals in my crashed ship. High-grade stuff, worth a fortune on the right markets." "Marcus, no. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he said firmly. "I'm offering. Those minerals could fund the replanting, cover your losses until new crystals mature. It would give us time to expose Dante and stop him from trying this again." Tears glittered in Zephyra's shifting eyes. "You'd give up your entire cargo? Your livelihood? For you? For this place?" Marcus cupped her face gently, watching her patterns brighten with hope. In a heartbeat. Their kiss was interrupted by an urgent message from the farm's communication array, a priority transmission from the Galactic Trade Commission. With trembling hands, Zephyra accepted the call. "Ms. Thorne," the stern-faced official on the screen announced, "we've received reports of contaminated crystals originating from your facility. Effective immediately, your farm is under quarantine. No crystals may be harvested or sold until a full investigation is complete." The transmission ended, leaving them in stunned silence. "It's over," Zephyra whispered. "Even with your minerals, if I can't sell crystals for the next 6 months." "No," Marcus said fiercely. "It's not over. We're going to fight this." But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if love would be enough to overcome the forces arrayed against them. Dante had played his hand perfectly: sabotage, rumors, and now official sanctions. They were trapped on all sides, with nowhere left to run. That night, as they held each other in the crystal-lit darkness of Zephyra's dwelling, neither spoke of the rescue ship that would arrive in 2 weeks. The communication relay would activate with the lunar convergence, and Marcus would have to choose: stay and fight an impossible battle, or leave and save himself. But as Zephyra's patterns pulsed with the rhythm of her sleeping heart, Marcus had already made his choice. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And some loves were worth risking everything to protect. In the distance, Dante's surveillance devices recorded everything, adding it to a file that would soon reshape the fate of 2 worlds, and determine whether love could truly conquer the cold mathematics of corporate greed. The battle for Zephyra's heart and heritage was about to begin in earnest.